Daniel was at the wheel of his car, driving slowly through the deserted streets of the city. It was dawn, and the quiet darkness of the night enveloped him like a comforting blanket. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Snow had begun to fall a few hours ago, covering the city with a thin, shimmering layer that reflected the sparse lights of the street lamps. Winter was just beginning, but the cold was already palpable, seeping into clothes and skin, bringing with it a sense of nostalgia. Daniel had always felt at peace during these solitary hours. It was as if the world slowed down, allowing him a rare moment of introspection. He needed this, especially now, with everything that was happening in his life. He accelerated slightly as he entered the main avenue, usually a sea of cars and pedestrians during the day, but now completely empty. There was something almost surreal about driving down this familiar road that seemed transformed by the absence of life. Daniel knew that in a few hours, the city would return to its frantic pace, but for now, he could enjoy this brief respite. It was then that he saw it. Something orange, almost incandescent, standing out against the white of the snow. Initially, he thought it was a garbage bag or some other object left behind, but something about it made him slow down. As he approached, his eyes focused better on the shape, and what he saw made his heart beat faster. It was a girl, huddled, sitting on the sidewalk, covered in snow. Daniel stopped the car abruptly and got out, feeling the icy wind hit his face. He ran to the girl, his heart tight at the sight of her, so small and fragile. Her blonde hair was damp and stuck to her forehead, and her cheeks, rosy from the cold, were visibly trembling. She was wearing an orange coat that seemed too big for her small body, and her gloves, now soaked, were full of snow. "Hey, are you okay?" Daniel asked, kneeling beside her, trying not to scare her. "What are you doing here, alone, in this cold?" The girl looked up at him, and Daniel was struck by a look of confusion and fear. Her eyes were large and gray, shining with a mixture of tears and snow. I was playing hide-and-seek with my dad," she mumbled, her voice weak, almost inaudible. "But I couldn't find him. I'm hot. Very hot." She tried unsuccessfully to open the zipper of her coat, but her fingers were frozen and trembling. Daniel, feeling a wave of compassion, picked up a handful of snow from the ground and offered it to her. "Here, suck on this," he said softly. "It will help you cool down a bit." She looked at the snow in his hand, hesitant, but then took it with her small hands and brought it to her lips. She licked the snow slowly, and for a moment her eyes seemed to shine with a bit of life. "It's snow. It's real," she murmured, almost as if surprised. "Yes, it's snow," Daniel replied, smiling softly, though his heart was tight with concern. "Where's your mother? Do you live around here?" The girl shook her head slowly. "We took a bus. Mom needs to go home, but I don't know where she is." Daniel felt a tightness in his chest. The situation seemed to be getting worse by the second. Such a small child, alone, lost in the snow. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm, though he felt a growing urgency within him. "Clara," replied the girl, her voice trembling. "Clara, I'm going to take you to my house where you can warm up," said Daniel, determined. "Then, we'll look for your mother. Is that okay?" Clara nodded, visibly relieved. She was so exhausted that she no longer had the strength to question help from a stranger. Daniel picked her up in his arms, surprised at how light she was, and carried her to the car. As he settled her in the passenger seat, he wondered how someone could leave a child alone in the snow. The protective instinct he didn't know he possessed began to manifest, and he knew that, regardless of what happened, he wouldn't leave Clara helpless. As he drove back home, Daniel looked at Clara, who was now asleep in the seat, her small body wrapped in the oversized coat. He knew this night would be different from all others. Something had changed inside him. He felt an overwhelming responsibility for that girl, something he couldn't fully explain. No matter what he had to do, he knew he needed to protect her, care for her, as if she were his own daughter. And with that determination, he accelerated the car through the empty streets, while the snow continued to fall softly, covering the city in a layer of purity, like a new beginning. Daniel's house was a place of contradictions. From the outside, it was a typical suburban residence, with white walls and large windows, surrounded by a small garden that during spring bloomed with vibrant colors. However, inside, the house was a prison of silence and shadows. Each room seemed to carry the weight of memories that Daniel preferred to forget, and the air was perpetually impregnated with the bittersweet smell of medications, a constant reminder of his mother's condition, Rosa. Upon arriving with Clara, Daniel felt that familiar smell envelop him as soon as he opened the door. It was an odor he never managed to get used to, no matter how hard he tried. The smell of illness, of stagnation, of a time that had stopped. He entered with Clara in his arms, taking care not to wake her, but the change in temperature made her open her eyes slowly, looking around with a sleepy and confused expression. "This smell, it's like the hospital," Clara commented, wrinkling her small nose as Daniel put her on the floor. "My mother is sick," explained Daniel, trying not to let the pain those words always caused him show. "She had an accident and now needs constant care. I have a nurse here who helps, but today you are my special guest." Clara looked at him, her big eyes seeming to absorb every detail of the explanation, although she said nothing. Daniel began to remove her small shoes, which were soaked with melted snow, and hang her heavy coat on the coat rack. The house was warm, but not in a welcoming way. It was a suffocating heat, which seemed to emanate from the walls and furniture, as if it had been trapped there for so long that it had become oppressive. "Are you hungry?" Daniel asked, trying to change the subject to something lighter. He knew that with a child, basic needs came first. "I can make some pancakes. Do you like pancakes?" Clara's eyes lit up at the mention of food, a sparkle that Daniel realized was a reflection of need, more than enthusiasm. "Is there jam?" she asked, almost in a whisper, as if she were afraid of asking for too much. "Of course there is," Daniel replied, smiling. "There's jam, honey, and even a bit of whipped cream if you want. Let's go to the kitchen, and I'll prepare something really tasty for you." Clara nodded, squeezing her small hands, now without the gloves, which were hanging to dry. Daniel took her hand and led her to the kitchen, the only place in the house that still seemed to have a bit of life. It was a cozy space with shelves full of glass jars containing grains, pasta, and spices. An old clock on the wall made a constant ticking sound, the only sound besides their breathing. Daniel put her in a high chair and began to move around the kitchen, gathering ingredients for the pancakes. He wanted to make something simple, but tasty, something that could warm Clara's body and heart. As he prepared the batter, he couldn't stop thinking about his mother, who was in the next room, probably sleeping or staring at the ceiling, as she did most of the time. Rosa had been a strong woman, determined, a force of nature who had always guided Daniel's life with a firm hand. But since the accident, she had transformed into a shadow of what she had been. The accident. Daniel tried not to think about it too much, but whenever he did, he felt overwhelming guilt. He wasn't there to prevent it from happening. He wasn't there to protect her. "Do you have children?" Clara suddenly asked, interrupting his thoughts, her thin voice echoing through the silent kitchen. Daniel paused for a moment, surprised by the question. "No, Clara, I don't have children," he replied, turning his attention back to the pan where the pancakes were starting to brown. "But someday, maybe I will." Clara watched him attentively, as if trying to decipher something in his words. "My dad says that people who don't have children are lucky," she commented, her voice calm, but laden with something that Daniel couldn't immediately identify. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest. "Why would he say that?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral, while feeling a wave of sadness for that little girl. "Because children are a lot of work," Clara replied, not looking directly at him. "And they cost a lot of money, especially girls." Clara's words were like a knife. Daniel felt a silent anger grow inside him, not directed at her, but at the father who had planted these thoughts in such a young child's head. He crouched down beside her, gently placing his hand on hers. "Clara, you're an amazing girl," he said, looking into her eyes. "And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Children are a blessing, whether they're boys or girls." Clara looked at him for a long moment before turning back to the plate of pancakes he had placed in front of her. She picked up a pancake and began to spread jam on it, her expression now more focused on the task than on Daniel's words. He watched her in silence, feeling a weight in his heart. Something inside him said that there was much more behind Clara's words, something he would need to discover, but for now all he could do was ensure that she was warm, fed, and safe. As Clara ate, Daniel stepped away for a moment, leaving the kitchen for the hallway that led to his mother's room. He stopped in front of the closed door, feeling her presence like a heavy shadow in his life. He didn't know how to face her, how to ask if the doctor's suspicions were true. And even if they were, he didn't know if he was prepared to deal with it. The weight of responsibility seemed to crush him, but he knew he couldn't run away. He needed to be strong, for Clara, for himself, and even for his mother. As Clara ate pancakes in the kitchen, Daniel found himself in the hallway, leaning against the wall with his eyes closed and his mind in turmoil. The smell of medications that permeated the house was a constant reminder of his mother, Rosa, and everything he had sacrificed in recent months to care for her. But now, with Clara under his roof, he found himself at an emotional crossroads he had never anticipated. The conversation he had had with his mother's doctor that morning echoed in his mind like a constant hammer, breaking any attempt to find peace. The idea that his mother might be faking or exaggerating her condition to maintain control over him was too disturbing to be fully accepted, but at the same time, impossible to ignore. He had always believed that Rosa was truly ill, that she needed him. After all, since the accident, she had become dependent on his care and attention. But now, these certainties were unraveling. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to calm his thoughts. He wondered if he wasn't being unfair, if he wasn't betraying his mother by questioning the veracity of her illness. She had always been a strong woman, who would never admit weakness, and perhaps this was just an extension of her need to appear invulnerable. But what if the doctor was right? What if Rosa was manipulating the situation, using her supposed fragility as a way to keep Daniel by her side, to prevent him from moving forward with his own life? These doubts corroded Daniel from within, like an acid that slowly dissolves his conviction. He knew he needed answers, but he didn't know how to get them. Confronting his mother seemed like a Herculean task, something he deeply feared. Since he was a child, Rosa had always had a dominant presence, an almost authoritarian figure that he respected and at the same time feared. How could he now stand against her, question her intentions without feeling like a traitor? As he struggled with these thoughts, he realized that there was another, more immediate problem that needed to be solved. Clara. The girl was clearly disturbed by something she was not willing or able to express fully. Her words about her father, about not feeling loved or wanted, echoed in Daniel's mind, mixing with his own painful childhood memories. He wondered if Clara was going through something similar to what he had gone through, if she was trapped in a situation where love was conditional and limited, a bargaining chip rather than a genuine feeling. The idea that Clara might be living a nightmare similar to his filled him with deep sadness. He knew that somehow he had to protect her, had to ensure that she didn't go through the same thing he went through. But how? He could barely handle his own problems. How could he now take responsibility for a child? However, every time he thought of Clara, he felt an irresistible urge to care for her, to be for her what he never had. Daniel opened his eyes and looked at his mother's bedroom door. He knew he couldn't keep postponing this confrontation. He needed to know the truth, needed to understand what was really happening with Rosa, so he could make a decision about his future and about Clara's. But fear paralyzed him, a mixture of fear of what he might discover and what it would mean for his life. He moved away from the door and returned to the kitchen. Clara had finished the pancakes and was now playing with a small doll that Camilla, the nurse, had left for her. There was something incredibly innocent in the way she held the doll, as if that small object was the only thing she could control in a chaotic and unpredictable world. "Do you want more pancakes?" Daniel asked, trying to sound casual, but his heart was heavy. Clara looked at him and shook her head. "No, thank you. I'm full." "Okay," he said, sitting down beside her. For a moment, they both sat in silence, only the ticking of the clock filling the air. Daniel wanted to ask more about Clara's father, wanted to better understand what was happening in her life, but feared that any question might open a wound he wasn't prepared to heal. Instead, he decided he needed to take one step at a time. "Clara," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I want you to know that you're safe here, and that you can tell me anything, okay? No matter what it is, I'm here to help." Clara looked at him, her big eyes seeming to reflect a myriad of emotions she didn't know how to express. But finally, she just nodded, an almost imperceptible movement, but one that carried the weight of a promise of trust, even if still timid and uncertain. Daniel felt a glimmer of hope in his chest. He knew the path ahead would be difficult, full of challenges he couldn't foresee, but for the first time in a long time, he felt he had a purpose. He needed to uncover the truth about his mother, yes, but he also needed to ensure that Clara had the chance for a better life, a life where she felt loved and valued, no matter what happened. And with this new determination, he decided that regardless of what the future held, he would not back down. Not anymore. It was time to face his fears, his demons, and finally find a way to live the life he had always wanted, a life free from the chains of the past. That morning had started like any other for Daniel. He woke up early as usual, feeling the weight of another day of responsibilities. His life in recent months had become an endless cycle of caring for his mother, work, and lonely nights, where he tried in vain to find some meaning in everything he was doing. He was trapped in an exhausting routine, an existence that seemed increasingly purposeless. However, that particular morning brought a novelty he hadn't expected. As he prepared to leave the house, the phone rang. Daniel looked at the screen and saw his mother's doctor's name appear. His heart immediately tightened. It was rare for the doctor to call him directly, and when he did, it was never for a good reason. With a feeling of foreboding, Daniel answered the call. "Good morning, doctor," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Good morning, Daniel," replied the doctor, his voice calm and professional, but with a note of seriousness that didn't go unnoticed. "I reviewed all your mother's x-rays again." Daniel felt his blood freeze. He knew the x-rays had shown a fracture in the femoral neck, something serious, especially for someone of Rosa's age. "And what did you find?" he asked, trying to stay calm. "The fracture has healed," the doctor said, his words leaving Daniel momentarily speechless. "She should be walking normally by now." "But then why isn't she?" Daniel asked, feeling a mixture of relief and confusion. "That's what we need to investigate," the doctor continued. "It seems that the problem isn't physical, but psychological. She may be afraid of hurting herself again, or there may be other factors at play." "What kind of factors?" Daniel asked, his tone becoming sharper as anxiety increased. "In some cases," the doctor began hesitantly, "patients can develop a psychological block that prevents them from fully recovering. This can be the result of trauma, or in some cases, a way to maintain constant attention and care." The doctor's words hung in the air like an accusation. Daniel felt a wave of disbelief and anger rise within him. "Are you suggesting that my mother is faking?" he asked, his voice getting louder than he intended. "I'm not suggesting that," the doctor replied calmly. "I'm saying we need to consider all possibilities. Sometimes people don't do this consciously. It can be a defense mechanism, but we need to investigate further. I would recommend that you consider consulting a psychotherapist to help your mother." Daniel didn't know what to say. The idea that his mother might be manipulating the situation, even unconsciously, filled him with a mixture of anger and guilt. I don't know what to think about this," he finally said, his voice weak. "I understand that this is difficult to hear," the doctor said, his voice full of understanding. "But it's important that you know that this isn't uncommon, and that help is available if you decide to go down that path." Daniel thanked the doctor and hung up the phone, but the words continued to echo in his mind. He spent the next few minutes standing in the kitchen, staring into space, trying to process everything he had heard. His mother, the woman he had always seen as a rock, could be pretending to be sick. And if she was, how should he react? Confront her? What if the doctor was wrong? What if Rosa really was sick? And he, by doubting her, was committing an unforgivable injustice. These questions swirled in his mind like a hurricane, each more disturbing than the other. Daniel felt torn between the love and loyalty he had always felt for his mother and the need to understand what was really happening. He knew that regardless of the truth, their relationship would never be the same again. Once the seed of doubt is planted, it will inevitably grow, and there was no going back. As these issues tormented him, Daniel also couldn't stop thinking about Clara. The girl was a new variable in his life, something he hadn't foreseen, but that now became impossible to ignore. He felt responsible for her in a way he couldn't fully explain. Perhaps it was because, seeing Clara, he remembered himself as a child, vulnerable, lost, seeking love and acceptance. He knew he needed to do something, that he couldn't simply ignore what Clara had told him about her father. But what could he do? The mixture of emotions, anger, guilt, worry, began to weigh on his shoulders, like a burden he didn't know how to carry. He sat at the kitchen table, running his hands through his hair, feeling on the verge of collapse. Everything in his life seemed to be crumbling at the same time, and he didn't know how to stop the fall. It was in this state of despair that Camilla, the nurse, entered the kitchen. She looked at Daniel with her attentive and compassionate eyes and immediately realized that something was wrong. "Daniel, what happened?" she asked, approaching him. He looked at her, trying to find the words to explain what he was feeling. But how could he verbalize something that he didn't even fully understand himself? "The doctor, he said my mother might be faking," Daniel finally said, his voice choked. Camilla frowned, clearly surprised, but not shocked. "Faking?" "He said it's possible that it's psychological, that she might be using this as a way to keep my attention," Daniel continued, feeling miserable saying those words out loud. Camilla was silent for a moment, clearly thinking about what Daniel had said. "I'm not a doctor, but I've seen this happen before. It's not that your mother is lying necessarily. It could be something she herself doesn't realize she's doing." "But what should I do?" Daniel asked, his voice full of despair. "How can I know what's real and what's not?" Camilla put her hand on his shoulder, a gesture of comfort that he appreciated more than he could express. "Maybe it's time for you and your mother to have a difficult conversation," she suggested gently. "It may not be easy, but sometimes we need to face the truths we fear most in order to move forward." Daniel knew Camilla was right, but that didn't make the idea any less terrifying. He was about to get up when the sound of small footsteps echoed through the kitchen. Clara appeared at the door, holding the doll she had brought with her. She looked at Daniel, her eyes full of curiosity and perhaps concern. "Are you okay?" she asked, her small voice full of genuine concern. Daniel looked at Clara, feeling a wave of tenderness for that little girl who had somehow already become so important to him. "Yes, Clara," he answered, forcing a smile. "Everything's fine." But deep down, he knew it wasn't. Nothing was fine, and he had no idea how to fix things. All he knew was that somehow he needed to be strong, for Clara, for his mother, and for himself, even if it meant facing his worst fears. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. He couldn't let Clara see how troubled he was. "Actually, Clara," he said, his voice softening, "I was just thinking about what we should do today. Would you like to go to the park?" Clara's eyes lit up at the suggestion, but then dimmed just as quickly. "But, what about your mom? Don't you need to take care of her?" Daniel felt a pang in his heart at Clara's concern. Even at her young age, she was already so attuned to the needs of others. "Camilla will be here to look after her," he explained, glancing at the nurse who nodded in agreement. "It's okay for us to go out for a little while." "Okay," Clara said, a small smile forming on her lips. "Can we feed the ducks?" "Of course we can," Daniel replied, feeling a bit of the weight lift from his shoulders. Maybe this was exactly what he needed, a break from the suffocating atmosphere of the house, a chance to clear his head and focus on something positive. As they prepared to leave, Daniel couldn't help but notice how Clara's entire demeanor changed. She seemed lighter, more animated. It was as if the prospect of a simple outing had breathed new life into her. He realized then how much she must have been affected by the heavy atmosphere in the house. They walked to the nearby park, Clara's small hand in his. The air was crisp and cool, a welcome change from the stuffy interior of the house. As they approached the pond, Daniel could see the excitement building in Clara's eyes. "Look at all the ducks," she exclaimed, pointing at the water. Daniel smiled, genuinely this time. "They're beautiful, aren't they? Here, let's get some bread to feed them." As they tossed small pieces of bread to the eager ducks, Daniel found himself relaxing for the first time in what felt like ages. The simple act of being outside, of doing something so normal and carefree, was therapeutic. He watched Clara laugh as the ducks quacked and scrambled for the bread, and he felt a warmth spread through his chest. "Daniel," Clara said suddenly, her voice serious despite the joyful scene around them, "are you sad because of your mom?" The question caught him off guard. He looked down at Clara, surprised by her perceptiveness. Yes, I suppose I am," he admitted. "It's complicated, Clara. Sometimes, when people we love are sick, it can make us feel sad and worried." Clara nodded solemnly. "My mom gets sad a lot, too," she said. "Sometimes she cries when she thinks I'm sleeping. Is that why you wanted to help me? Because you're sad, too?" Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. He knelt down to Clara's level, looking into her eyes. "Clara, I wanted to help you because it was the right thing to do. No child should be alone and scared like you were. But you're right, in a way. Sometimes, when we're going through hard times, it can make us more aware of others who might be struggling too." Clara seemed to consider this for a moment. Then, to Daniel's surprise, she wrapped her small arms around his neck in a tight hug. "I'm glad you found me," she whispered. Daniel hugged her back, feeling a surge of protectiveness. "I'm glad I found you too, Clara," he said softly. As they continued their walk through the park, Daniel's mind was racing. He knew he needed to address the situation with his mother, but he also knew he couldn't ignore Clara's needs. The girl had already been through so much, and he was determined to give her the stability and care she deserved. Returning home, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. He may not have all the answers, but he was committed to finding them. He would talk to his mother, seek professional help if needed, and do whatever it took to create a safe and loving environment for Clara. As they approached the house, Daniel saw Elena, Clara's mother, standing on the porch. Her face was a mixture of relief and anxiety. Clara let go of Daniel's hand and ran to her mother, who scooped her up in a tight embrace. "Mommy!" Clara cried, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. Elena looked at Daniel over Clara's head, her eyes filled with gratitude and something else. Fear, perhaps. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank you for taking care of her." Daniel nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. He was glad Clara was reunited with her mother, but he also felt a strange reluctance to let her go. "It was no trouble," he said. "Clara is a wonderful child." As Elena set Clara down, Daniel noticed bruises on her arm that she quickly tried to cover. A suspicion he had been harboring suddenly crystallized. "Elena," he said carefully, "is everything all right at home?" Elena's eyes widened, and she instinctively pulled Clara closer. We're fine," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Daniel took a deep breath. He knew he was about to step into something complicated, something that could change all their lives. But looking at Clara's hopeful face and Elena's fearful eyes, he knew he couldn't turn away. "Listen," he said gently. "I don't know exactly what's going on, but if you need help, any kind of help, I'm here. You and Clara, you're not alone." Elena's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Daniel thought she might break down right there. But she straightened her shoulders, looked him in the eye, and nodded. Maybe we could talk," she said softly. As they all walked into the house together, Daniel felt as if he was standing on the precipice of something monumental. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that somehow, some way, he would find a way to help Elena and Clara, even as he grappled with his own family issues. The challenges ahead were daunting, but for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't alone in his struggles anymore, and perhaps in helping others, he would find the strength to face his own demons. As they entered the house, Daniel felt a shift in the atmosphere. The air seemed charged with a mix of tension and possibility. He led Elena and Clara to the living room, where they sat down on the worn but comfortable sofa. Clara, sensing the seriousness of the moment, clung tightly to her mother's side. "Can I get you anything? Water? Tea?" Daniel offered, trying to ease the tension. Elena shook her head. "No, thank you. I I don't even know where to begin," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel sat across from them, leaning forward slightly. "Take your time," he said gently. "You're safe here." Elena took a deep breath, her eyes darting around the room as if checking for unseen threats. Finally, she spoke, her words coming out in a rush. "It's my husband, Clara's father. He's not a good man. He drinks, and when he drinks, he gets angry. So angry." Her voice broke on the last word, and she instinctively pulled Clara closer. Daniel felt a surge of anger at the thought of anyone hurting this woman and child, but he kept his voice calm. "How long has this been going on?" "Years," Elena admitted, her eyes downcast. "I've tried to leave before, but he always finds us. He says he'll change, that he loves us, but—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Clara, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. "Daddy hurts Mommy," she said, her small voice filled with a sadness no child should know. "He says it's because he loves us, but I don't think love should hurt." Daniel felt his heart break at Clara's words. He looked at the little girl, marveling at her wisdom and strength. "You're right, Clara," he said softly. "Love should never hurt." Turning back to Elena, Daniel spoke with quiet determination. "You don't have to go back. There are places, organizations that can help you and Clara. You can be safe." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "But where would we go? We have no one." "You have me," Daniel said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "I know we've just met, but I promise you, I will do everything in my power to help you both." As the words left his mouth, Daniel heard a noise from the hallway. He turned to see his mother, Rosa, standing there, leaning heavily on her walker. Her face was a mix of confusion and concern. "Daniel?" she called out, her voice weaker than he remembered. "What's going on?" For a moment, Daniel felt overwhelmed. Here he was, offering help to virtual strangers while his own mother needed him. But as he looked from Rosa to Elena and Clara, he realized that perhaps this was exactly what they all needed. "Mom," he said, standing up and moving to her side. "This is Elena and her daughter Clara. They need our help." Rosa looked at the woman and child on the sofa, taking in their frightened expressions and Elena's poorly concealed bruises. Something in her face softened. "Of course," she said, her voice stronger now. "Of course we'll help." Daniel felt a rush of emotion at his mother's words. For the first time in months, he saw a glimpse of the strong, compassionate woman she used to be. He helped her to a chair, and together they faced Elena and Clara. "We have a spare room," Rosa said, looking at Elena. "You and your daughter can stay there as long as you need." Elena burst into tears, overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. Clara, not fully understanding but sensing the importance of the moment, hugged her mother tightly. As Daniel watched this scene unfold, he felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. The problems hadn't disappeared. His mother's health issues, Elena's abusive situation, Clara's trauma. But somehow facing them together made them seem less insurmountable. He knew the road ahead would be difficult. There would be legal issues to navigate, therapy for both Elena and Clara, and the constant threat of Elena's husband, not to mention the ongoing mystery of his mother's condition. But for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt hope. As the afternoon turned to evening, Daniel found himself in the kitchen, preparing a simple meal for everyone. The house, which had felt so oppressive for so long, now seemed alive with possibility. He could hear Clara's laughter mixing with his mother's gentle voice as they set the table together. Elena appeared in the doorway, her eyes red from crying but with a newfound determination in her stance. "Thank you," she said simply. "I don't know how we can ever repay you for this." Daniel shook his head. "There's no need for repayment. Sometimes life puts us in a position to help others, and we have to take that opportunity." As they all sat down to eat, Daniel looked around the table, his mother looking more engaged than she had in months. Elena, still nervous but with a glimmer of hope in her eyes. And Clara, her face alight with the simple joy of a shared meal. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. They would need to contact the authorities, find legal help for Elena, and continue to unravel the mystery of his mother's health. But for now, in this moment, Daniel felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. As he passed the salad bowl to Clara, who beamed at him with trust and affection, Daniel realized that sometimes, in helping others, we find the strength to help ourselves. And with that thought, he allowed himself to truly smile for the first time in what felt like forever. The future was uncertain, but they would face it together, an unlikely family forged in adversity, bound by compassion and the simple human need for connection. And for now, that was enough. As the days turned into weeks, a new routine began to take shape in Daniel's house. The initial awkwardness of having Elena and Clara as unexpected house guests gradually gave way to a sense of comfort and belonging. The house, once filled with silence and unspoken tensions, now buzzed with life and activity. Daniel found himself waking up each morning with a renewed sense of purpose. He would start his day by helping his mother, Rosa, with her exercises, which she approached with increasing determination. Then he would join Elena and Clara for breakfast, a meal that had become a cherished time for all of them to connect and plan their day. Elena, with Daniel's support, had begun the process of legally separating from her abusive husband. It wasn't easy. There were moments of fear and doubt, times when she questioned whether she was doing the right thing. But with each passing day, Daniel saw her grow stronger, more confident in her decision to build a better life for herself and Clara. Clara, for her part, was flourishing in this new environment. The scared, withdrawn little girl Daniel had found in the snow was slowly being replaced by a curious, vibrant child. She had started attending a local school, and her backpack, once empty, was now filled with colorful drawings and gold star-adorned papers. One evening, as Daniel was helping Clara with her homework, she looked up at him with her big, earnest eyes. "Daniel," she said, her voice serious, "are you my dad now?" The question caught Daniel off guard. He glanced at Elena, who was sitting nearby, her face a mixture of emotions. "Clara," he began carefully, "I care about you very much, but your dad is still your dad, even if he's not here right now." Clara nodded, considering this. "But you take care of me like a dad, and you don't hurt Mommy. I wish you were my real dad." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. He pulled Clara into a gentle hug. "I may not be your dad, Clara, but I promise I'll always be here for you. You, your mom, and my mom. You're all my family now." Elena, who had been listening silently, wiped a tear from her cheek. "We're so lucky to have you, Daniel," she said softly. As the days passed, Daniel found himself growing closer to Elena. They would often stay up late, talking after Clara had gone to bed. Elena shared stories of her life before her marriage, her dreams that had been put on hold, the person she used to be before fear and abuse had dimmed her spirit. Daniel, in turn, opened up about his own struggles, his complicated relationship with his mother, his feelings of inadequacy, his fear of never living up to his own expectations. One night, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Elena turned to Daniel. "You know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I never thought I'd feel safe again. But here, with you, I do." Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something shift inside him. The moonlight softened her features, highlighting the strength and beauty that had been there all along, waiting to emerge. Without thinking, he leaned in and kissed her softly. For a moment, the world stood still. Then Elena pulled back, her eyes wide with surprise and something else. Hope, perhaps? "Daniel," she breathed. I'm sorry." Daniel said quickly, feeling a rush of embarrassment. I shouldn't have. But Elena shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. Don't be sorry, she said. I've wanted to do that for a while now. As they sat there, hands intertwined, Daniel felt a sense of rightness settle over him. It wasn't going to be easy. They both had a lot of healing to do, a lot of baggage to work through. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Inside the house, Rosa watched from her window, a knowing smile on her face. She had seen the change in her son, had witnessed the way this unexpected family had breathed new life into him. And while part of her felt a twinge of guilt for her past behavior, for the ways she had held him back, a larger part felt an overwhelming sense of pride and joy. The next morning, as Daniel helped her with her exercises, Rosa spoke up. Daniel, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months, I think it's time we talk to the doctor again. Daniel looked at her, surprised. Are you feeling worse? Do you need... But Rosa shook her head. No, son. I think it's time I started getting better. Really better. Daniel felt a rush of emotion, relief, hope, and a love for his mother that transcended all the complicated history between them. Okay, Mom, he said, squeezing her hand. We'll do it together. As they finished their exercises, Daniel heard Clara's laughter floating in from the kitchen, mixed with Elena's gentle voice. He smiled, realizing that somehow, in the midst of all the chaos and uncertainty, he had found something he never knew he was missing. A family, unconventional as it might be, bound not by blood, but by choice and love. The road ahead would not be easy. There were still challenges to face, wounds to heal, and a future to build. But as Daniel stood there, caught between his past and his future, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And that, he realized, was the greatest gift of all.